I never thought shoveling snow would be a controversial activity, but I also never thought my quiet little neighborhood would turn into a miniature police state run by a woman with a clipboard and a thirst for absolute power. My name is Mark, and for 15 years I've lived in Maple Creek Estates. It was always the kind of place where people borrowed sugar, kids played in the street, and the homeowners association was mostly a formality for collecting dues to mow the common areas. I run a small landscaping and general contracting business from my home, so I'm around a lot. I know the neighbors, I know their kids, I know whose dog barks at the mailman. It was a good life, peaceful and predictable. That all changed the year Carol Buchanan moved in. She bought the old Miller house on the corner, a nice two-story colonial that she immediately began improving with a ferocity that was frankly a little alarming. We didn't think much of it at first. Newcomer with a lot of energy, fine, but then she joined the HOA board. Our board had always been a sleepy affair, run by a retired accountant named Frank, who mostly just wanted to make sure the pond fountain didn't break. Within 6 months, Frank had mysteriously retired, and Carol was the new president. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound like a dire emergency that only she could solve. The changes started small, trickling in through condescendingly worded emails. First, it was the mailboxes. They all had to be a specific, uniform model, painted a shade of black she called presidential onyx. Anyone with a non-compliant mailbox received a notice. Then came the rules about lawn maintenance. Grass could be no shorter than 2 inches and no taller than 4. Holiday decorations were to be erected no earlier than the 1st of December and removed no later than the 2nd of January. Failure to comply would result in fines. The emails were always signed, "Regards, Carol Buchanan, President, Maple Creek Estates, HOA, for the betterment of our community." Most people just grumbled and complied. It was easier than fighting. Who wants to argue about the exact shade of their mailbox? I repainted mine, trimmed my lawn to her exacting specifications, and tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. My neighbor Arthur, a sharp old fellow who'd lived here even longer than I had, put it best. "She's building a little kingdom, Mark," he'd said to me over the fence one afternoon, "and every king needs subjects, not neighbors." He was right. Carol didn't want a community, she wanted a curated exhibit, and we were the living, breathing, and occasionally non-compliant displays. The real turning point for me, the moment this went from a background annoyance to a personal war, had nothing to do with grass or mailboxes. It came on a crisp Saturday in late October. The air had that perfect autumn chill, the leaves were a riot of orange and red, and it was the ideal evening for a small, controlled bonfire. I had a heavy-duty steel fire pit on my stone patio, well away from the house or any trees. It was something my family and I did a few times every year: roast marshmallows, tell stories, and just enjoy the evening. It was completely legal according to town ordinances, which I knew because I'd checked years ago. I was a contractor. I knew about codes and permits. The fire was crackling away nicely. My wife Sarah was bringing out a tray of hot chocolate, and my 2 kids were arguing over who got the first marshmallow. It was a perfect domestic scene. That's when I saw her. Carol Buchanan, marching across her perfectly manicured lawn and then onto mine, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. She didn't walk so much as stride, a woman on a mission of extreme importance. She stopped at the edge of my patio, her face a mask of stern disapproval. "Mark," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. There was no greeting, no preamble. "You are in violation of Section 7, Paragraph C of the Maple Creek Estates Community Bylaws." I stood up, taking a slow sip of my hot chocolate to give myself a moment. The kids fell silent. Sarah froze mid-step. "Evening, Carol," I said, keeping my voice level. "What seems to be the problem?" She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured finger. "Section 7, Paragraph C. No open burning of any kind is permitted on residential properties within Maple Creek Estates. Your bonfire is a clear and flagrant violation. You need to extinguish it immediately." I glanced at my contained fire pit, then back at her. I could feel the anger starting to simmer, but I pushed it down. Getting angry with people like Carol is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Ironic, I know. Carol, this isn't open burning. This is a commercially manufactured, self-contained fire pit on a non-combustible surface. It's perfectly safe, and more importantly, it's perfectly legal under town law. The HOA can't override town ordinances. Her eyes narrowed. It was the look of a person who had never once considered the possibility that she might be wrong. The bylaws are the bylaws, Mark. They were voted on and approved by the board for the safety and aesthetic integrity of our community. I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. This, of course, was a bald-faced lie. We all knew she was the author of every new draconian rule. With all due respect, Carol, that rule is unreasonable and probably unenforceable, I said calmly. I'm not putting it out. My family and I are enjoying a quiet evening on our own property. This was not the answer she was expecting. Her authority had been questioned. The mask of stern leadership slipped to reveal the petty tyrant underneath. If you refuse to comply, she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone, you will be issued a $100 fine. A subsequent fine of $200 will be issued for every 24-hour period the violation continues. And if you think I am bluffing, I will call the fire department right now and have them shut you down. I almost laughed. It was so absurd. She was threatening me with the very people who would confirm I was doing nothing wrong. Go ahead, Carol, I said, giving her a small, tight smile. Please, call them. Let's get an official opinion on the matter. I gestured towards the fire pit. I'll wait. For a second, she looked stunned, like a chess player whose pawn had just captured her queen. But she recovered quickly, her face hardening with righteous fury. She pulled out her phone, her thumb jabbing at the screen with angry little stabs. You'll regret this, Mark, she hissed. You'll see. There are rules for a reason. She turned and marched back across my lawn without another word, the phone already pressed to her ear. My kids looked at me, wide-eyed. Is that lady going to get you in trouble, Dad? My son asked, his voice small. I tousled his hair. No, buddy. She's the one who's going to be in trouble for wasting everyone's time. I hoped I was right. I watched her disappear into her house, the porch light glinting off her smug, self-satisfied face. The peaceful autumn evening was ruined. The battle had been joined, not over a mailbox or a patch of grass, but over a simple, harmless fire. And I had a sinking feeling that Carol Buchanan was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. About 20 minutes later, just as I'd predicted, a fire truck rumbled down our quiet street, its lights flashing but siren off. It pulled to a stop in front of my house. 2 firefighters hopped out, looking more bored than concerned. I walked out to the driveway to meet them. Carol was already on her porch, arms crossed, watching the scene with an air of profound vindication. "Evening, gentlemen," I said. "Sorry you had to come all the way out here." The older of the two, a captain by the look of his helmet, gave a weary sigh. "We got a call about an illegal, out-of-control burn. This it?" He gestured vaguely toward my backyard. "That would be the out-of-control burn in question," I said, leading them onto the patio. They took one look at my fire pit, a neat little circle of flame with a mesh cover, sitting on a bed of paving stones 10 feet from anything flammable. The captain glanced at his partner, who just shook his head. "Ma'am," the captain called across the lawn to Carol, his voice laced with professional exhaustion. "This is a contained recreational fire. It's perfectly compliant with all town and state fire codes. There's no violation here." Carol's face fell. This was not the public shaming she had envisioned. "But our homeowners association bylaws clearly state," she began. The captain cut her off, his patience clearly gone. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your HOA doesn't command this fire department. We enforce the law. He's not breaking the law. Please don't call us again unless there's a genuine emergency." He gave me a nod. "Have a good night, sir. Try to enjoy it." They climbed back into their truck and drove away, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. I looked over at Carol. Her expression was a mixture of humiliation and pure, unadulterated rage. She shot me a look that could have curdled milk, spun on her heel, and slammed her front door so hard I thought the glass might break. I had won the battle, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that the war was just beginning. She had been publicly embarrassed, and a person like Carol would never, ever let that go. The first fine notice arrived 2 days later, tucked under my windshield wiper. $100 for failure to comply with a directive from an HOA official. It was absurd, but it was also official looking. The next day, another one appeared. $200 for continuous violation of Section 7, Paragraph C, even though there had been no fire since that night. She was just making things up now. I tried to reason with her. I sent her a polite, carefully worded email explaining, once again, that the fire was legal and that her fines were baseless. I attached a copy of the town fire code. Her reply was swift and curt. The fines stand. Payment is due within 30 days. Regards, Carol Buchanan, President. This was when the campaign of harassment truly began. A notice on my door, because my work truck, which I had parked in my own driveway for 15 years, was suddenly a commercial vehicle in violation of a rule she'd clearly just invented. A fine for a non-conforming shrub near my walkway, a rose bush that had been there since the house was built. She was walking the neighborhood with her clipboard every single day, documenting every perceived infraction, but her focus was overwhelmingly on me. It wasn't just me, either. She started targeting others who she perceived as being on my side. My friend Arthur got a notice because his newspaper was still on his driveway at 9:01 a.m., a violation of the new property tidiness mandate. But her cruelest attacks were reserved for Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down. Her husband had been an avid gardener, and she did her best to keep up his prized rose garden, but her arthritis made it difficult. Her bushes were a little overgrown, a little wild, but they were beautiful. Carol saw them as an affront to her sense of order. She began fining Mrs. Gable $50 a week for unkempt landscaping. I saw Mrs. Gable by her mailbox one morning, her hands trembling as she held one of the notices. She looked close to tears. "I don't know what to do, Mark," she confessed. "I can't afford this, and I can't manage all that pruning by myself anymore." That was it. This was no longer about my pride or a stupid bonfire. This was about a bully terrorizing a sweet old woman. I went over to Mrs. Gable's house that weekend and spent the entire afternoon pruning her roses, weeding her garden beds, and making sure everything was immaculate. I didn't ask for a dime. When I was done, her yard looked pristine. On Monday, Carol sent her another fine. The reason? Unauthorized alterations to landscaping without architectural review committee approval. She was fining her for fixing the very thing she'd been fining her for in the first place. The sheer, malicious insanity of it was breathtaking. I had to do something. This had gone far beyond petty. I realized I was out of my depth. Carol was weaponizing the HOA's legal structure against us, and I was just a contractor. I needed a professional. I called a lawyer my business had used a few times for contract disputes, a no-nonsense guy named Mr. Davies. I laid out the whole story in his office, from the bonfire to the fines against Mrs. Gable. I brought the stack of notices, the emails, a copy of the old bylaws, and the new ones Carol had implemented. Mr. Davies listened patiently, his face grim. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair. "Well, Mark, you've got yourself a classic petty tyrant situation," he said. "And unfortunately, HOAs have a surprising amount of power. These documents she's sending you, as ridiculous as they are, create a paper trail. If you don't pay, she can eventually put a lien on your property." The word lien sent a chill down my spine. This was my home, my family's security. So what do? I can't just pay her for things I didn't do. "No, you fight back," Davies said, leaning forward. "But you have to fight smart. Right now, it's your word against hers. You need to turn the tables. You've been on the defensive. It's time to go on the offensive." He laid out a plan. First, document everything. Every interaction, every new notice, every conversation. Take pictures. Keep records. Second, start looking into her. People like this, Davies explained, who are this obsessed with rules are often breaking a few themselves. And people this obsessed with control are often hiding something. You need to scrutinize the HOA's operations. The budget, the meeting minutes, the contracts. She's president, but she's not a monarch. She's accountable. He suggested I file a formal request for all HOA financial records for the past year, which was my right as a homeowner. He also told me to start talking to my neighbors quietly. Find out who else was being targeted. Build a coalition. A single complainer is a nuisance, he said. A dozen angry homeowners is a revolution. I left his office feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. This was going to be a long, ugly fight. I went home and, following his advice, immediately drafted a formal, legally worded request for all of the HOA's financial documents, citing the relevant state statutes. I sent it to Carol via certified mail. Then I went to see Arthur. I told him everything, including the lawyer's advice. His eyes lit up. "I knew it," he said, slapping his knee. "I've had a bad feeling about her since she strong-armed her way into the presidency. The books, Mark. The answer is in the books. She's spending our money on something, and I doubt it's just mowing the lawn." The certified letter clearly rattled Carol. She couldn't legally refuse my request, but she could delay. Her email response was dripping with passive aggression. "The documentation you have requested is extensive and will require significant administrative effort to compile. A processing fee of $500 will be required to cover the costs." I immediately forwarded it to Mr. Davies. His reply was a single sentence: "Pay it. It's bait. The fact she's charging an exorbitant and likely illegal fee means there's something in there she doesn't want you to see." I wrote the check that day. While I waited for her to produce the documents, Arthur and I started our quiet campaign. We went door to door, not with flyers or petitions, but just for conversations. We talked to the guy who got fined for his basketball hoop. We talked to the young couple who were told their children's playset was an unapproved structure. We talked to Mrs. Gable, assuring her we were handling it. The stories poured out. Almost everyone had a story about Carol, a fine, a threat, a condescending email. They were all afraid to speak up alone, but as they realized they weren't the only ones, a quiet anger began to build. The fear she had cultivated was starting to curdle into resentment. We had our coalition. A month went by, and still no documents. I sent another certified letter, this time drafted by Mr. Davies, informing her she was now in violation of state law and that further legal action would be taken. 2 days later, a large, messy box of papers was unceremoniously dumped on my front porch. There was no order to it, just a jumble of receipts, bank statements, and invoices. It was designed to be overwhelming and impossible to decipher. That night, Arthur and I spread everything out on my dining room table. We had coffee, spreadsheets, and a shared sense of purpose. We spent hours sorting, cross-referencing, and building a financial picture of Carol's presidency. For the most part, it was boring. Lawn care contracts, insurance payments, water bills for the fountain. But then Arthur found it. "Mark, come look at this," he said, his voice low. He was holding a series of invoices from a company called Patriot Pyrotechnics. They were for a massive purchase of commercial-grade fireworks, totaling over $10,000. And there were corresponding entries in the budget, vaguely labeled Community Engagement Events and 4th of July Celebration Fund. "She's planning a fireworks show," I said, stunned. The HOA had never done anything like that before. "She's not just planning it, Mark," Arthur said, pointing to another document. It was a flyer, not yet distributed, announcing the first annual Maple Creek Estates Independence Day extravaganza. It promised a professional fireworks display, exclusive to residents, funded by their HOA dues, and a special event fee she had levied a few months prior. Something clicked in my head. A professional fireworks display requires a mountain of permits from the town, from the county, and most importantly, from the fire marshal. It requires licensed pyrotechnicians, detailed safety plans, and significant insurance coverage. I knew this because I'd once quoted a job for a client that involved some minor landscaping around a planned display. The amount of red tape was staggering. There was no way Carol, in her arrogance, had done all of that correctly. "Arthur," I said slowly, a plan beginning to form in my mind. "I think we've found it. This is her weakness. She's obsessed with my tiny legal bonfire, but she's planning to set off a truckload of explosives in the middle of our neighborhood. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. This was the leverage Mr. Davies had told me to find. She had created her own downfall, and it was going to be spectacular. Now, I have to tell you something about my family. I have a brother, David. We're close, but we're very different. I work with my hands, building and fixing things. He works with regulations and codes. He's a career firefighter who worked his way up the ladder, and for the last few years, he's been one of the county's lead fire marshals. His entire job is fire safety, code enforcement, and crucially, pyrotechnics permitting. I hadn't told him about my little HOA war. It seemed too petty to bother him with. But this changed everything. I didn't call him to ask for a favor. I called him for professional advice. I laid out a hypothetical scenario. "Hey Dave," I said, keeping it casual, "quick question for you. If a private community, say an HOA, wanted to put on their own big fireworks show, what would they have to do?" I could practically hear him sigh over the phone. "Oh God, don't tell me your neighborhood is trying to do that. It's a nightmare. They'd need a state pyrotechnics license, which takes months, a licensed operator on site, a detailed site plan submitted to my office at least 60 days in advance, a safety perimeter of at least 500 feet from the launch site, which is almost impossible in a residential neighborhood, a massive insurance bond, fire department detail on standby, which they have to pay for. The list goes on and on. 99% of the time, when an HOA asks, we tell them it's a non-starter. Why? I looked at the invoices on my table. "Just curious," I said. "I saw a flyer. Thanks, that's all I needed to know." After I hung up, I went to the county clerk's office and the fire marshal's office website. I filed public records requests for any and all pyrotechnics permits issued for the Maple Creek Estates property address. The answer, which came back a week later, was exactly what I expected. No records found. Carol Buchanan had spent over $10,000 of our money on a massive stockpile of commercial-grade explosives with absolutely no permits, no license, and no safety plan. She was so focused on enforcing her petty imaginary rules that she was about to commit a series of actual crimes, all while endangering the entire neighborhood. My strategy shifted. This was no longer about fighting back against fines. This was about preventing a potential catastrophe and exposing a corrupt, incompetent hypocrite. Mr. Davies was thrilled. "This is better than anything I could have hoped for," he said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "We don't just have her on bylaw violations anymore. We have her on reckless endangerment and misappropriation of funds. But we have to play this perfectly." The plan he devised was simple, elegant, and brutal. We would do nothing. We would let her continue planning her grand extravaganza. We would let her set up the whole show. We would let her gather the entire community on the common green, ready to crown herself the queen of Maple Creek. We would let her get to the very precipice of her triumph. And then, we would push. The next 2 months were a strange kind of torture. I continued to receive fines from Carol, which I dutifully filed away in a folder labeled Evidence. She strutted around the neighborhood with an air of smug superiority, her big 4th of July party clearly fueling her ego. She sent out emails reminding residents of the mandatory special event fee and bragging about the spectacular professional-grade show she had arranged. Mrs. Gable and the other targeted neighbors were getting nervous, but Arthur and I managed to keep the coalition calm. "Trust Mark," Arthur would tell them. "The wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine." I wasn't so sure about justice, but I was confident the wheels of Carol's own arrogance were about to run her over. A week before the 4th, I made one more call to my brother. This time, it wasn't hypothetical. "Dave," I said, "it's me. I'm calling in my official capacity as a resident of Maple Creek Estates. I have reason to believe that our HOA president is in possession of a large quantity of illegal commercial-grade fireworks and is planning to detonate them in a residential area next week without permits. Here is her name, her address, and the address of the planned event." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mark, are you serious?" Deadly serious, Dave. I have the invoices. I have the flyers. I've checked the public records. There are no permits. She's a menace. His voice shifted instantly from brother to fire marshal. It became cold, formal, and all business. "Thank you for the report, mister," he said, not using my first name. "The fire marshal's office will investigate this claim. Do not approach the individual or the materials. We will handle it." The day of the 4th of July arrived. It was a hot, sunny afternoon. On the community green, a large grassy area surrounded by houses, Carol and a few of her board cronies were setting up. There was a podium, a sound system playing patriotic music far too loudly, and the roped-off area where two unfamiliar men were carefully arranging what looked like a professional mortar rack setup. Carol was flitting about in a red, white, and blue pantsuit, greeting people, her face flushed with excitement and self-importance. Most of the neighborhood had turned out, drawn by the promise of a free show and the morbid curiosity to see what Carol had cooked up. Arthur and I stood at the back of the crowd, watching. Mrs. Gable stood with us, looking anxious. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" she whispered. "I'm sure," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Just watch." As dusk began to settle, Carol stepped up to the podium. The music died down. She tapped the microphone, and a squeal of feedback echoed across the green. "Welcome, residents of Maple Creek Estates," she began, beaming. "Welcome to a new era for our community, an era of standards, of beauty, and of community spirit. For too long, our neighborhood has settled for mediocrity, but I believe in excellence. And tonight, as a symbol of our renewed commitment to being the best, your Homeowners Association is proud to present a fireworks display that will be the envy of the entire county." She paused for applause, which was sparse and half-hearted. She didn't seem to notice. "So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show that your dues and commitment to excellence have made possible." She gave a grand wave toward the launch area. One of the technicians spoke into a walkie-talkie. Nothing happened. He spoke again, sounding agitated. Carol's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. And that's when they arrived. Not one fire truck, but two. And behind them, two county sheriff's cars. They didn't come slowly. They rolled in with purpose, their lights flashing, cutting through the twilight and casting long, dancing shadows across the terrified faces in the crowd. They pulled right onto the grass, forming a cordon around the launch area. Out of the lead vehicle stepped my brother David in his full fire marshal's uniform. He didn't look at me. His face was a thundercloud of official authority. He strode directly toward the roped-off area, two sheriff's deputies flanking him. Carol's jaw dropped. She scurried down from the podium, her face a comical mask of confusion and outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, rushing to intercept them. "This is a private event. You are trespassing." David didn't even break stride. He held up a hand to stop her, a gesture of pure, dismissive power. "Ma'am, I am Fire Marshal David Miller with the County Fire Marshal's office," he announced, his voice booming across the now silent crowd. "We have received a credible report of the illegal storage and planned detonation of commercial pyrotechnics at this location. Is this your event?" "This is the Maple Creek Estates Community Celebration," she sputtered. "It is fully authorized." "Authorized by whom?" David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because it certainly wasn't authorized by my office, or the state, or anyone with the legal authority to do so. We've been investigating this for a week. You have no permits, you have no license, you have no insurance bond. What you have," he said, gesturing to the mortar racks, "is several felonies worth of illegal explosives set up less than 200 feet from occupied dwellings." The color drained from Carol's face. The entire crowd was watching, their phones out, recording. This was better than any fireworks show. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, trying to regain control. "The company I hired, Patriot Pyrotechnics, they handled all of that." David gave a short, harsh laugh. "Ma'am, Patriot Pyrotechnics consists of you and a post office box. The men you hired are unlicensed day laborers you paid in cash. We've already spoken to them. They're cooperating fully." He turned to the deputies. "Secure the materials and detain her." "Detain me?" Carol shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You can't! I am the president of the Homeowners Association." One of the deputies, a large man who looked like he'd heard every excuse in the book, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you are being detained pending an investigation into reckless endangerment, illegal possession of explosives, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Please put your hands behind your back." Carol Buchanan, the self-appointed Queen of Maple Creek, the enforcer of rules, the arbiter of standards, was handcuffed in the middle of the community green, in front of every neighbor she had lorded her power over. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated her face, which had crumpled from arrogance into pure, pathetic despair. As they led her to one of the patrol cars, her eyes found mine in the crowd. There was no anger in them anymore, just a shocked, defeated emptiness. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story was in the local paper the next day. HOA president arrested for illegal fireworks scheme. The investigation into the fireworks was just the tip of the iceberg. With Carol's authority shattered, the police and eventually the district attorney's office took a very close look at the HOA's finances, armed with the box of documents Arthur and I had already organized. What they found was a pattern of fraud and embezzlement that went far beyond the fireworks. The invoices for Patriot Pyrotechnics were just one example. There were dozens of others. Invoices for landscaping services from companies that didn't exist. Receipts for administrative supplies that turned out to be her personal shopping trips. The processing fee she charged me for the documents was found to have gone directly into her personal bank account. She had been systematically looting the HOA's coffers from the moment she took power, using the fines she levied against residents as a supplementary income stream. The special event fee for the fireworks was just her most audacious cash grab. She was charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, wire fraud, and reckless endangerment. With the evidence stacked a mile high against her, including the testimony of her two terrified cronies on the board who flipped on her instantly to save their own skins, she had no choice but to take a plea deal. She was sentenced to 2 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, a figure that amounted to nearly $60,000. The court placed a lien on her house, the very weapon she had tried to use against me, to ensure the debt was paid. My own vindication was swift and total. The day after her arrest, I received a call from a lawyer representing the now leaderless HOA. He informed me that all fines against me and every other resident were being immediately voided. The illegal lien threat was gone. He apologized profusely on behalf of the community and asked if I would be willing to serve on an interim board to help right the ship. I politely declined the board position. I had no desire to be the new Carol. I was a contractor, not a politician. But I did recommend Arthur, who, to my surprise, accepted. He and a few other level-headed residents, including a relieved Mrs. Gable, formed a new board. Their first act was to hold a community-wide meeting where they shredded Carol's entire book of tyrannical bylaws. They kept the essentials, dues for lawn care, basic upkeep, and threw out the rest. The rules about mailbox colors, lawn height, and holiday decorations vanished overnight. They also held a vote to formally dissolve the existing HOA and reform it under a new, much simpler charter with strict transparency and oversight rules. The vote was unanimous. The legal fees for this process were almost entirely covered by the first restitution payment from the sale of Carol's house. She lost everything: her home, her money, her freedom, and the one thing she seemed to crave most of all: control. A couple of years have passed since the night of the failed fireworks show. Maple Creek Estates is quiet again. It's better than it was before, actually. The shared experience of fighting off a petty tyrant brought us all closer. People are friendlier, more willing to help each other out. The HOA is practically invisible, which is exactly what it should be. Arthur served as president for 1 year, got things running smoothly, and then happily retired again, handing the reins to a young mother who runs the meetings with cheerful efficiency. I saw Carol once, about a year after she was released from prison. I was picking up supplies at the local hardware store, and she was working there as a cashier. She was thinner, and the hard, self-righteous certainty in her eyes was gone, replaced by a weary, haunted look. She recognized me as I stepped up to the counter. Her face flushed with shame, and she wouldn't meet my eye. She scanned my items in silence. As she handed me my receipt, she mumbled something. "I'm sorry," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I looked at her for a moment. The anger I had once felt was long gone. All I felt was a sort of detached pity. She was a diminished figure, a ghost of the monster she had tried to be. She had built a prison of rules for all of us, but in the end, she was the only one who got locked inside. "I know," I said, and then I walked away. There was nothing else to say. Sometimes, when I'm out on my patio on a cool autumn evening, I'll start a small fire in my fire pit. The kids will roast marshmallows, Sarah will bring out the hot chocolate, and the smell of wood smoke will drift through the quiet, peaceful neighborhood. It's a simple thing, a small pleasure, but it feels like a victory. It's a reminder that no one, no matter how much power they think they have, has the right to extinguish the small, happy fires in other people's lives. It's a lesson in the quiet strength of community, reason, and standing your ground. And it's a reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully who plays with fire is to let them get burned by their own grand, illegal, and ultimately pathetic fireworks show. The neighborhood is ours again, and that's a piece you can't put a price on.